Welcome back to AM Northwest. She was one of the last members of the Women's Air Force service pilots to die in the line of duty during World War II, and her roots to the Rose City ran deep. Here to share a new biography on Hazel Ying Lee, we welcome the author of American Flygirl, Susan Tate Ankeny. Good to have you with us, Susan.
Thank you for having me.
What made you decide to look into Hazel?
Well, I wish I could say it was my idea, but it wasn't. There was an editor at a publishing company at Kensington, Wendy McCurdy actually, who approached my agent with the idea of the book about Hazel. She thought it was time to write. She couldn't believe there wasn't a story published about her, and Wendy chose the title, American Flygirl.
Oh my gosh, her story, Hazel's story is incredible, and it feels like, so born in Portland's Chinatown, 1912,
yes,
right? One of 8 kids, went to what is now Cleveland High School,
yes,
correct?
Yes.
And she actually went against all the odds.
Yes, she
so
did.
Tell me about her.
Well, in 1912, as a woman, she was expected to stay home and raise children and also take care of her family.
Right.
And it was not applauded to go out and do anything else. It was shunned. And she was very brave to try to do anything differently.
Right.
And also she was Chinese American, and at that time the Chinese Exclusion Act was enforced with harsh discrimination against both Chinese and Chinese Americans here in Portland. And it was incredible.
They could work in Chinatown but couldn't work outside of Chinatown unless they were not seen.
Unless they were not seen. They basically in their lives could not be seen outside of Chinatown. They couldn't work where they'd be seen. They couldn't go into public restaurants or tennis facilities where Hazel would have liked to have played tennis. Yeah. She was excluded from all of those. They couldn't own a home, sit on a jury, vote. They were powerless.
Right. And it was a big population of Chinese Americans.
Yes, this was the second biggest Chinatown, Portland, in the country.
Yeah, outside of San Francisco, right? Okay, so let's talk now specifically about Hazel. At 19, she went to an air show and she fell in love with flying. Tell me about that.
She did. Well, a friend of hers was taking lessons and they went to an air show and his instructor offered her a ride in a biplane. And can you imagine at that time? I mean, being in an airplane, it's an open cockpit. And she just instantly fell in love with it and decided she had to do whatever she could to fly, and she was going to need money to take flying lessons, and she was going to have to find an instructor that would teach a Chinese American woman.
So how did she do that?
Well, again, she was relentless as usual. She did find Al Greenwood, who had a flying school in Portland, the Chinese Flying School, and he was training young Asian American men to go into combat in China. And so he was sort of sympathetic to Chinese Americans. He appreciated them. He didn't see that as the detriment that other people did.
So that was one of her first jobs, was to go to China to fly, right? Explain how that
Yes, in terms of flying.
Yes.
Yes. Well, she was trained here for combat to be a dog fighter.
Wow.
And there were 32 flyers sent from Portland to China, and when they got there, she found out she couldn't fly because she was a woman. So all of them
as if you didn't have enough going against you.
I know. And also she was there an American, and they thought they might be spies. So here she was Chinese, and there she was American, and still a woman, and she couldn't fly.
So where did she go from there? Once she did that, where did she go from there? Because then she started working for the U.S.
Yes, she was commissioned an officer in China and spent many years there until she was a war refugee after being bombed out of Canton. Came to the U.S. thinking that she would be able to fly for the military here. She's a trained combat pilot.
Right.
And kept writing and asking, and they kept refusing her and even suggested maybe she could be a secretary or a nurse. Yeah. And she's trained in combat. So eventually she finds out about the WASP training, the Women's Air Force Service pilots.
And what kind of role does she have there?
In the WASPs?
Yes.
She does what all of the WASPs were doing, ferrying aircraft across the country. They were also test pilots. They trained men in the Air Force to fly. And some of the WASPs flew targets behind their planes that were shot at with live ammunition so men could practice before combat.
Oh my gosh. The women, other WASPs, other pilots loved her.
They loved her.
So tell me about her personality, because it sounds like I would love to be her friend.
I would too. I would too. She had a huge personality and sense of humor. She was an extrovert. She was authentic before authentic was, you know, the cool thing to be. Yeah. She was just herself, and this is who I am, and this is who I'm going to be. And people took to her. Most of her friends in the WASP program had never met a Chinese person before. Right. They all remarked about that in their letters.
And didn't she introduce them to Chinese culture?
She did, yeah. Yes, and she'd go to Chinese restaurants as they were ferrying planes around the country and order in rapid-fire Chinese, they said, and they were all just amazed, and she loved food.
Yeah, and then didn't she also put Chinese characters of each person's name on the back of her plane?
She did, on the front, actually, on the nose.
Okay.
If they were taking a shipment of planes somewhere, she and her friends were going to be in the group, she would write their names in Chinese under the nose of their plane with lipstick, usually, sometimes chalk, so she could see them while they were flying. They could see each other. Yeah, she would know which plane her friend was in.
She married a man who was actually just an open kind of guy who accepted her as she is.
Clifford Louie was an amazing man. He came here from Seattle, closed up his noodle shop in Seattle, he and his cousin, and came down here to learn to fly with Al Greenwood in that flying school program to go into combat. So they met here when he was 18 and she was 19, and ended up going to China together and didn't get married until almost 10 years later here in this country.
Wow. She also, the way she died was really tragic. Yes. So tell me how that happened.
There was a shipment of planes, they were actually headed for Russia, and they were coming from the factory in Niagara Falls, and they were being delivered at this point to Montana, but the weather had been so bad that the pilots had been kept in different cities along the way, and some of them never did make it. The weather cleared on Thanksgiving, and this tower wasn't well staffed because it was Thanksgiving, and all these planes descended at once, and it was a frenzy.
Yeah.
There was panic, and red and green lights were being flashed, and some of their radios were garbled. The pilot above her didn't have a working radio, and because it was Thanksgiving, he couldn't get it fixed at the last fuel stop. So he comes in, he doesn't see her underneath, she doesn't see him above, and he basically lands his plane on top of her, and they explode.
Oh no. She didn't survive. I understand that he survived.
He did. He got out of the plane, and she did survive the crash. She was on fire, and a lieutenant was awarded a medal later for going into the fire and carrying her out. She was literally on fire, and she lived for 3 days.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She is an incredible story, American Flygirl. You have a book event, and that's tonight, I know, at Annie Bloom's at 7 o'clock on Capitol Highway in Portland, and also Broadway Books on May 15th as well. So you have a lot going on. It's a fascinating story. Love her. I just want her to be around now so we can hang out with her. Susan Tate Ankeny, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Stay with us.